Hello, everyone. My name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Today I'm going to do something a little different. I call this episode UFOs in Your Hometown by special request. I've often said that if you dig deep enough, you will find that pretty much every location on this planet has a long history of UFO encounters. And I put out a challenge a couple of episodes ago asking all of you to name your hometown or a location where you'd like to see if there were encounters there. And you did. Thank you. I got a huge response. More than 50 of you replied. So what I'm doing today is picking the first 10 people who replied and doing a lot of investigating and digging and seeing if I can find UFO encounters in these locations. And it turns out I was right. I found a huge number of UFO cases in all of these locations. So, the cases I've chosen today are the most interesting. It's certainly not all the cases that are in these locations because, again, there are so many encounters, but certainly some really fascinating sightings. But not only that, landings, face-to-face encounters with humanoids, and of course a couple of onboard experiences. These locations are all across the United States mostly, but a couple outside of the United States. So what I'll be covering today include these locations: Wenatchee, Washington; Sioux Falls, South Dakota; Payson, Arizona; Albany, Georgia; Aalborg, Denmark; also Visalia/Tulare in California; the Philippines; St. Louis, Missouri; also Ocala, Florida; and Wilmington, North Carolina. Quite a few locations there. So this is going to be a fairly long episode. I tried to pick the most interesting cases, but let's just get started. And the first location I am covering is Wenatchee, Washington. This was requested by IDS Now, so this is for you, IDS Now. I hope you find this interesting. One of the first reports in Wenatchee actually includes humanoids, and it appears to be connected to the very famous airship wave of the late 1890s and early 1900s. It was the afternoon of September 16, 1907, when a group of Wenatchee residents saw what looked like a dirigible moving swiftly across the sky. They could see a cabin below it. They could actually hear music coming from it. One of the witnesses, a hunter, used field glasses to view it more closely, and he said he saw two men and a woman of, quote, rare beauty. The next day, another strange airship passed overhead at 7 a.m., causing a huge uproar in the town. Were these human-piloted ETs? Really, this has never been sufficiently answered. The whole airship wave remains a mystery. But there are more encounters. Here's a sighting from July 30, 1952. It was around 9:30 p.m. as a gentleman who lived on Malaga Street in Wenatchee saw a, quote, small star-sized lights. He said they were moving in a crescent formation slowly and silently across the sky towards Twin Peaks. And he was very much impressed, as the witness says, and I quote, I know they were flying saucers. And here comes another case from a witness by the name of Estelle Elmer, who lived on Old Rock Island Road. And he said that he and his wife and their neighbors saw UFOs on an almost nightly basis throughout late August in 1959. What they were observing was usually a single sort of white-yellow light, but sometimes there were two or three of them. They called a news reporter who came out, and he saw the lights himself. Other people began to see them too. They called the police. A school teacher reported the object she saw, which she said had red, orange, and white lights. There was a group of people in Kashmir who said that they saw one of these lights dart upwards, hover, and then move across the sky. So clearly not a balloon or anything like that. Some of the reporters who looked into this actually called the FAA and the Air Force, who said that they knew nothing about it and that there were no known aircraft in that location at that time. And the sightings, of course, continued. On the night of March 3rd, 1972, Lonnie DeCamp, who lived at 2000 Skyline Drive in Wenatchee, said that he, his family, and neighbors saw a, quote, glowing blue cone with lights coming out of the top in a fan shape. There's some really interesting cases of people who describe UFOs that look like ice cream cones, straight out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So they watched it for about 20 minutes, even using binoculars, before it darted away at high speed. And in fact, as Lonnie DeCamp says, it's the craziest thing I ever saw. It doesn't act like an airplane or anything I've ever seen. They called the police, who sent a car over, but strangely, the UFO left right before the police arrived. Now, I went to NUFARC, the National UFO Reporting Center, to do some investigating there, and there are almost 100 cases which they have recorded in Wenatchee, and almost all of these are anomalous lights. But here's one involving a silver metallic ship, which was seen around 10 p.m. one August evening in 1979. And I'll just quote the witness, who says, "I was sitting on my front step just before full darkness, facing due north, when I happened to look up and saw a UFO passing directly overhead. The object appeared to be silver in color, triangular in shape, basically flat underneath, with clearly visible joints and rivets. Also visible underneath were what appeared to be either lights or portholes lit from within. The object was extremely large and appeared to be quite close." So he goes on to say that it was slow, silent, had no wings. While this does not appear to be a conventional craft, the fact that he believed he saw rivets points towards this craft possibly being a reverse-engineered, human-piloted craft. Hard to say for sure. Now we move to another case which occurred on January 16, 1980. The main witnesses are Ted King. He and his wife were in their home in Wenatchee when they saw a UFO hovering above Mission Ridge. They called the police, who said it might be lights from the ski slope reflecting off of the ski slope. Not surprisingly, Ted King disagreed. As he says, it was at least 600 feet above Mission Ridge. It was clear as a bell. He could see it clearly enough to see that it was cylindrical. It had a red light on it. He said it hovered for 40 minutes and then darted away at high speed. As he says, and I quote, "It was gone in a second or two." So clearly not lights reflecting off of the snow. Moving on to another case, at 2:45 a.m. on September 28, 1982, Warren Bissonnette and his mother observed a glowing and pulsating red-orange object from their home at 634 Cottitas Street. They told reporters. The reporters contacted the FAA, who said it might be flares. But Warren Bissonnette disagreed. As he says, they weren't like flares. He said that these objects were 3 times brighter than stars. They would pulsate. One of them hovered in place while another moved horizontally and then downward, and the other moved off into the distance and disappeared. Many sightings of anomalous lights. Here's a really interesting case, which I thought was important to include because of the way it maneuvered. It was on the night of April 4, 2004, when a Wenatchee resident saw a red-silver object in the sky, and suddenly it made a 90-degree turn in the sky. So clearly not a conventional craft. And it was just 5 nights later that another resident reported the same type of movements. Now, how about this? This is an unusual case, which is not quite a UFO, but certainly bizarre. This is cryptozoological. I had to include it because it's just so strange. You can make up your own minds about it. But one evening in late December 2007, a man had a car accident in Wenatchee. Police arrived. The man said that as he drove northbound on Wenatchee Avenue, he saw what looked like a, quote, pterodactyl fly overhead. He was so stunned he lost control of his car and drove into a light pole. This is how the police were called. They did test him for alcohol. He had been drinking a little bit, but he was under the legal limit by far. So I don't know. He says he saw a pterodactyl. And if you look into that subject, there are a lot of people who said they've seen these things. I don't know. But that's cryptozoology, and that's the only case I included in this episode today, but I had to do it because it was so weird. Moving on to another case, date is not confirmed, but it's probably around 2011, one evening at 2:30 a.m., when a man and his friend saw a bright green sphere over East Wenatchee. They said it was pretty big, about the size of a truck, and as they watched, it darted straight up. Now, what's so interesting about this case is that 1 hour earlier, their friend told them that she and several others had seen a huge, silent craft, a metallic craft of some kind, solid, flying over downtown Wenatchee. And the witness to this green sphere didn't take her seriously until, of course, 1 hour later, when he and his friend saw this other UFO. And here's one final recent case, which occurred at 7:20 p.m. on July 20, 2017. A man said he was driving along Sunset Highway and saw a, quote, large silver craft, all silver, like a mirror. He said it was hovering in front of Birch Mountain. MUFON investigated, and they were unable to identify the craft as anything conventional. MUFON also has a number of cases in Wenatchee. So there you go. That's a brief, abridged history of UFOs in Wenatchee, Washington. Pretty amazing. I couldn't find any humanoid encounters. I was pretty disappointed about that, but certainly some really fascinating cases stretching back 100 years. It's remarkable how long this has been going on. So now we move to the next location, which is Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And this is by special request from Verpine. So, I found some really interesting cases here, mostly sightings, what appears to be a landing as well, a really interesting photographic case as well, just some really interesting cases. So I hope you find this interesting, Verpine, and let's get started. The first case I could find in Sioux Falls occurred way back in July of 1947, very close to the time of the Roswell UFO crash. There was a huge superwave of activity going on at this time, and Gregory Zimmer of Sioux Falls reported his observation of a disk at several thousand feet. He said it was moving at very high speed to the southwest. It's a brief report, but certainly compelling. And here's another case, September 25, 1954. I like this one because it involves police officers. Several patrolmen reported seeing a, quote, blue-white ball, which they said was moving in excess of 1,000 miles per hour. There were many others in the area who also witnessed it. In fact, these were seen over a wide area, including Fargo, Sioux Falls, and into Minnesota. Another very interesting case occurred a few years later in November 1957 when Officer Jack Peters photographed a half-disc-shaped object just east of Pierre, not too far from Sioux Falls. It was also witnessed by Patrolman Don Kelm. The Williston Herald wrote that, quote, South Dakota is literally being invaded by flying saucers. State Police Radio said saucer posses saw at least 10 Monday night, November 26. Mysterious objects were reported at Redfield, Sioux Falls, Del Rapids, Virgil, Custer, Hot Springs, and Pierre. One witness from Sioux Falls, Dennis Reefers, said that he was 10 or 12 years old, the date is not given, when he saw a UFO with portholes and with what might be beings inside of it. As Dennis says, we got on top of the hill and heard something and looked up and saw a saucer-shaped object was right above us. It made a sound like a cutting of wind, a whizzing sound. It was spinning, but there were windows all around, and you could see something inside, but couldn't see what because it was spinning. Moving on, starting around 11 p.m. on August 28, 1976, numerous people in Sioux Falls saw clusters of red, blue, and white lights. Police officers also saw them too. The sightings went on till about 2:30 a.m., so hours. One woman said a saucer actually followed her car. Two boys reported their sighting of a tall figure with a shiny blue uniform that appears to be connected to this mini wave of sightings. 3 deputies said that they saw an object actually land in a field 3 miles north of Hartford, but as they approached, it quickly flew away. So this appears to be another example of what UFO researchers call a display. Sometimes these UFOs are wanting to be seen. Now, the National UFO Reporting Center had almost 100 cases from Sioux Falls. I looked through them. They were almost all anomalous lights. Perhaps the most interesting to me comes from a middle schooler who said that on July 12, 2018, he was coming home on the bus from Brandon, Sioux Falls, when he saw 3 flying discs. They were flashing lights, and he turned to tell the others on the bus, but when he looked back, all the discs were gone. And as he says, I saw 3 discs flying around that day, and I am not crazy. Well, this all was happening. I noticed that I felt sick to the stomach and got red blotches on my skin for a short period of time. So there you go, some fascinating cases, landings, some physiological effects, all kinds of encounters. It's amazing how many cases there are, because I'm sure there are far, far more than the ones I've listed here. You can consider this sort of an abridged history of each location's history of UFO encounters. Now we move to the next location, which is Payson, Arizona. Some really interesting cases in this one. This is by special request of Daniel B. So thank you, Daniel. I hope you find this interesting. I found quite a few cases. I couldn't find any real cases of humanoids, though I have to say the Travis Walton case did occur not far from Payson, Arizona. Not specifically in Payson, but yeah, some really interesting cases in this location for sure. Now here is a case from the National UFO Reporting Center. They had about 20 cases in Payson, and this is the only one involving a solid metallic craft. It was early July 1969 when 3-year-old Jacqueline and her family experienced a close-up sighting of a solid metallic UFO over their secluded ranch in Payson. Jacqueline was just being put to bed when the entire family noticed a very bright object hovering low in the sky above their home. In fact, Jacqueline's grandfather shouted out, "What the hell is that?" And he rose from his chair. Jacqueline ran for the door, but her grandfather stopped her, and together they watched this disc-shaped object. It had large square windows or portholes around its side, each of which was illuminated by a lemon yellow light. Every second or so, the object would emit a high-pitched beeping sound, and they watched it move in this slow, gliding manner, cruising leisurely upward. And as Jacqueline says, it was a dark night, but we could see that it was disc-shaped by the illumination of its own light, and apparently that created enough light to cast around the object and allow us to see it. Jacqueline's father, upon seeing it, yelled out, "Oh my God, it's a UFO!" and began screaming for the other members of the family to come outside and watch. Now, if Jacqueline's father hadn't been holding her, she would have run towards it, she said. By the time the rest of the family arrived, it was already moving away. They did go outside, they searched the area, all traces of the object were gone, and even though she was only 3 years old, she remembers it vividly. And she got some confirmation years later when she went to visit her grandfather. As Jacqueline says, "I was visiting him in his apartment in California with my mother when someone brought up the UFO subject, and I made the casual remark, 'Like the one that Gramps and I saw.' And at that instant, the 80-year-old man jumped up and went nuts, yelling, 'You remember! You remember!'" So yeah, a UFO sighting is often a very memorable experience for people. And here's another really interesting case. This occurred on the morning of January 6, 1981, when Sheriff Deputy Lois Hamlin said that he and 2 others observed 4 silver discs flying in a diamond formation at about 10,000 feet altitude. As he says, when they made a left turn, the sun would shine on them, and they'd be clearly visible. When they turned right, they seemed to disappear. So he said they were silent, metallic in appearance, and he reported it to UFO investigators, telling them, "I never said anything about it before because of what people might say." He did admit to an earlier sighting where he watched an object pace a courier plane that leaves Payson daily. As he says, I saw it come down and stay right above the plane for a while, and then it went up again. And as it turns out, later that same day and evening, January 6th, there were several other sightings around Payson and the surrounding areas. Now here's another case which comes from Research Dongo in his book The Alien Tide. It occurred sometime in the late 1980s when Bill Lewis was attending a series of seminars in Phoenix. And one evening, while returning to his home in Payson, he felt an irresistible compulsion to drive outside of town. Unable to stop the car, he found himself about 50 miles north of Phoenix on Highway 87, and suddenly he heard a voice telling him to stop the car, and as if in a trance, he pulled over, exited the vehicle, walked away into a small valley, became quite frightened. As he says, all of a sudden, I got this incredible sense of fear. I felt threatened. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and I felt a chill go up my spine. I was terrified. And looking over his shoulder, he saw a light. And looking down into the valley, he could see that this valley was filled with light. And as Lewis says, it was almost like a tangible light, like the light had substance. The whole valley was lit up with this incredible, brilliant white light. Lewis found that he was unable to move. He could only stand and watch. And the next thing he knew, he was driving home to his wife and kids in Payson. And arriving home, he discovered he was missing more than 3 hours of time. So this is your classic missing time UFO encounter. Now here's a brief report, which occurred at 11 p.m. on September 29, 1986. A gentleman reported his sighting to QFOS. He said he had run out of gas near Payson and was at the side of the road when he saw 2 flashing lights. And he's looking at them trying to figure out what they were when suddenly these lights veered towards his car and then sped away into the night sky. Another report comes from MUFON. They have about 13 reports for Payson. This one is probably the most interesting. A man was at his friend's house in Payson, which overlooks the East Verde River, when his friend shouted out, "Oh crap." Looking outside, they both saw a glowing object about 20 feet away, very low, at eye level. On either side of this were groups of smaller lights. So the reporting witness ran outside while his neighbor stayed inside his home, and as soon as the witness ran outside, the object had disappeared. But his neighbor said that the object took off rapidly up the river. He told the witness that when he saw this object first arrived, it looked like a plane was about to crash. Now later the witness found out that his other neighbor also saw the same object as it moved up the river, and other people also saw it as it appeared on the Phoenix television stations about people seeing UFOs the night before. I think you'll agree those were some pretty fascinating accounts. When someone has a very strong emotional reaction to their encounter, I think that's a good sign that this is something that was really out of the ordinary. And now we move to the next location, which is Albany, Georgia. I found some really wild cases. I don't know how else to describe them. One involving absolute confirmation on radar. Some just overall super fascinating cases. This location was requested by Fringe, so this is for you, Fringe. I hope you find these reports interesting. And yeah, cases going quite far back, all the way to 1948, up to pretty much the current day. Now, I didn't find any humanoid cases in Albany. I did cover a previous one in another episode called Beyond Bizarre, which is just a few miles to the north, 30 or 40 or so, in Pelham, Georgia. So you might find that particular episode interesting, but definitely some super fascinating cases in Albany, Georgia. Lots of cases in Albany. One very early case was declared unexplained by Project Blue Book, and it occurred at 3:30 p.m. on September 22, 1948. This is near Turner Air Force Base in Albany. The main witness is Lieutenant Martin Rubisch. He was flying at 2,000 feet in a C-47 aircraft when he saw a shiny metallic object with no wings or rudder approaching about 2,000 feet away at 1,500 feet of elevation. It quickly darted off. Blue Book researchers were stumped as to what it might be and declared it unidentified. 5 years later, 9:35 p.m. on January 28, 1953, another pilot encounter. A pilot was flying his F-86 fighter jet in a training exercise over Albany when he encountered a brilliant white circular object. He approached it, and the object grew larger, started blinking white and red, then took on a triangular appearance and then split into two. The object and the F-86 fighter were both tracked on radar. In fact, the F-86 did a shallow attack dive at the UFO, and this UFO let the jet approach to a certain distance, but no closer, always maintain a distance between it and the aircraft, and after about 3 minutes, the object darted off at, quote, terrific speed. So a pretty well-verified case on radar. Later that year, August 15, 1953, a citizen reported to a local Albany newspaper that he actually saw a strange object maneuvering directly over the Albany, Georgia airport. There are lots of airport encounters in the literature. Here is another really interesting pilot case. 1956, pilot Don D. Emerson was flying his Piper Apache about 20 miles northwest of Albany when he saw a large object with portholes. It was just hovering in the sky and sending down 3 beams of bright light. And as Don says, it just seemed to sit there. I turned on my landing lights for identification, and the object vanished instantly. So a lot of these are just sightings, but here's one involving a close encounter of the second kind with weird electromagnetic effects, reported by bank employee Conway Jones. He called the police. On the night of November 22, 1968, he was returning to Albany, Georgia along Highway 91 when he saw a fiery orange oblong object moving at treetop level towards his car. And in fact, it came right over his car and hovered. This caused the radio to static, and then the radio, the car lights, and the engine all stopped. Needless to say, Conway Jones got out of his car and looked at the object for about 2 minutes, at which point it turned red and shot up into the air and out of sight. A very dramatic encounter. Now, the National UFO Reporting Center lists about 15 sightings in Albany, Georgia. The most interesting, I think, occurred one evening in June of 1971 when 2 people saw a solid craft. As one of the witnesses says, to our wonderment, this saucer-shaped craft was performing maneuvers above us. At first, it simply hovered about the height that a small aircraft would fly, maybe 1,000, 2,000 feet up. It made no engine noise. There was a row of what appeared to be windows completely encircling the center edge, as if 2 plates were placed together with the inner sides facing each other. These windows had vertical supports evenly spaced around the craft like plate glass windows. They glowed a deep orange from inside the craft. So they were watching it, then it shot off and was gone. They said that the sun rays were glinting off the edge of the craft. It had a dark metallic color, and it moved 3 or 4 times, then tilted at a 30 to 40 degrees, hovered, and shot away. Now, moving on, August to September of 1973, a flurry of sightings over Albany and surrounding areas caused waves at high levels of government and actually generated national headlines, as numerous witnesses, including state patrol officers, reported multicolored UFOs zigzagging across the skies of Albany. One of the reporters, Susan Shingler, a reporter for the Albany Herald, said that she and police officers actually saw these UFOs. As she says, 2 came flying across the sky. There were 6 in all, and some were larger than others. Now, Ray Smith, a radio man, said that he saw a dozen colored UFOs as people called into his station to report these objects hovering and darting around. So he went outside and he saw them. The sightings continued through September and in fact were reportedly photographed and filmed. The military was asked about them but refused to comment on whether they were even investigating. And researcher Stanton Friedman looked into these sightings, and he believes the government was trying to cover up what they knew. The Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, lists about 13 cases over Albany. One of the most interesting was at 9:10 p.m. on January 11, 2008, when a husband and wife viewed 10 large lights performing strange maneuvers, including circles and figure eights, doing what they called, quote, a lovely dance. Suddenly half of them shot off, 5 remained. They got out their video and were able to shoot some video before these objects darted away. Definitely some good cases there, some real honest to God, what would I call it, solid evidence, proof if you like, in terms of radar returns or electromagnetic effects, evidence of the government cover-up. It's clear our governments know exactly what's going on. And if you can imagine that the information I'm finding in these locations, just imagine how much our government knows. This is a real thing. This has been going on for a very long time. And now we move to another location, and this is outside of the United States. We are going to explore the UFO history of Aalborg, Denmark. This request comes from Helvesti, so this is for you, Helvesti. And I did find some really amazing cases here, including an onboard encounter. Not a whole lot of cases, so this is a pretty difficult area for me as a researcher based in the US to investigate. But I found some, and I think you'll find it fascinating. I certainly hope so. Here is an amazing case involving an onboard experience. It comes from the Danish UFO group, UFO Datenbach. The witnesses are an elderly farm couple living in Aalborg. They had sat down for dinner one summer evening in 1963 when a disc-shaped object landed on 3 landing legs in the fields by their farmhouse. The husband was still holding his fork when he ran out to investigate, and as he approached the disc, a door opened up, a ramp came down, and a tall, human-looking figure with long blonde hair stood in the doorway and invited the farmer to come on board. Now, much to his wife's fear and chagrin, this farmer accepted the invitation and went inside. The ramp retracted, the door closed, the object took off, and the poor wife immediately called the police. Now, he was missing for 4 hours. 4 hours later, while this farm was swarming with police and military officials, this disc landed. A door opened, the ramp came down, the farmer came out very happy and excited. The disc, of course, immediately took off. And for the next 2 days, this poor farmer was interrogated by authorities and had to explain all about his experience. He was told by authorities not to discuss his encounter, and he publicly said only that once he was on board, he was amazed to look outside a porthole or a transparent section, and he could see the earth receding into the distance, which really surprised him because there was no sensation of any movement whatsoever. So certainly a fascinating case of an onboard experience. I wish I had more info, but there are more cases. At 7:22 p.m. on September 3rd, 2006, a witness was coming home from a movie to his home in Aalborg, and he saw a white circular object which he felt was moving too slowly to be explained as a conventional craft. As he says, "I think it's kind of a UFO, but I don't know." 3 years later, 2 p.m., February 12, 2009, a lady described her sighting of a gray-silver, egg-shaped object hovering ahead of her. And as she says, "I was having a normal day out at the playground with my 17-month-old son and my husband. As we were on our bikes heading home, I was looking up at the sky, enjoying my time outside, when I looked up. I saw a silver or gray-looking round object, not that big, but big enough to wonder what the hell it could be. I told my husband to look up, but he was looking everywhere but where I told him to look. And by that time it was so small that we could not see it anymore. So unfortunately my husband did not get to see it. I guess we aren't alone after all. So one more case in Alberg was just after 3 p.m. on May 22nd, 2011, that a witness described his sighting of a small, black, disc-shaped object going from south to north. As the witness says, it was some unusual object and not the usual flight/balloon. He actually was able to capture a glimpse of it on his camera phone. So I told you there were some really good humanoid cases, some close encounters, and I wasn't lying. It's true. I'm pretty sure all of these locations have cases involving onboard experiences. They're much more difficult to find, of course, much more difficult to verify and so forth, but it's a worldwide phenomenon. This is happening everywhere. That's why I'm putting this episode out, because people need to know this. Every location has a long history of UFO encounters. And now we're moving to another location, which is Visalia and Tulare. These are neighboring cities. And this was by special request of probably on LSD. So yeah, probably on LSD. This is for you. I hope you find this interesting. There are cases stretching back 100 years. Another interesting photographic case as well. So enjoy. Some very early cases in Visalia and Tulare, and in fact they were participants in the very famous airship wave involving Zeppelin-like craft. It was late November of 1896 as hundreds of people in Tulare and Visalia saw a, quote, airship. They said it had red, green, blue, and white lights. It moved quickly at the speed of a train, was going up and down, right and left, in these unconventional movements as it moved in the northwest towards the Coast Range Mountains. So yeah, the airship wave remains an enigma to this day. So it wasn't long before UFOs returned. Two Visalians called the Visalia Times-Delta newspaper to report their sighting of a disc-like object on August 19, 1952. They said it hovered and flitted around along the eastern foothills. And in fact, over the next few weeks, many more calls came to the newspapers of unexplained lights. Throughout the year, there were always more sightings. On July 19, 1979, the Vista Press reported that Jenny McCarter and Michelle Williams, aged 17 and 16, said that they saw 3 diamond-shaped objects not far from the Visalia Municipal Airport. They were alerted to the objects by this loud humming noise, and looking at them, they saw that each object had 4 lights on them. Others in the area did report hearing the humming noise and or saw the objects too. Mario Lopez of Visalia said that around 10 p.m. he heard this buzzing noise and looking outside saw a gray, disc-shaped object with 4 red lights on it. It impressed him deeply. As he said, "I couldn't work the rest of the night after seeing that thing. It was right on top of us." So MUFON, of course, has several reports. One occurred on March 27, 2010. It's quite interesting. As the witness says, "I let my indoor cats outside to get some fresh air. While sitting in my chair, I saw a silver object. At first I thought it was an airliner high in the sky, as I had watched several cross the sky earlier. This was different. The silver disc-shaped object did not move in any direction for several minutes. As I watched longer, it seemed to move very slowly to the left, then stop, and move back very slowly to its original position. As I watched, I tried to consider what I was seeing. I knew this was not a balloon, as it did not drift. I was facing east, and the object was northeast at a 45-degree angle. It seemed to be very high in the sky. I would say 30,000 to 40,000 feet up. I had the impression the object was spinning, but can't say for sure because of the distance." So he watched it for about 10 minutes, went to get his wife, and when he got outside, it was no longer there. But as he says, "This was unlike anything I have ever seen. I was very disappointed that my wife missed it, as it was very odd." And he also said it had a polished chrome appearance. Now, Newfork National UFO Reporting Center has more than 50 reports of UFOs in this area. A very impressive case with photographic evidence took place on the afternoon of January 1st, 2022. As the witness says, a reddish-orange spherical object was witnessed by my wife, child, and myself, first from the backyard and then the front. This object not only moved in a way that no aircraft or pilot could possibly move, speed, direction, etc., but also made absolutely no sound at all. Our dog was barking heavily at it as well, which was also strange. After defying all laws of physics, it just disappeared. So he managed to capture 3 photos, as you can see, and he said it appeared to be a solid object with lights on it. It would change color, and they could all see this weird aura or haze around it. So it not only looked strange, moved strange, it sounded strange as well. These are the 3 earmarks of unconventional objects. There you go. That's Visalia, Tulare, California. Hope you found that interesting. It's certainly just a small sampling of the cases. There are a lot of cases of people sighting anomalous lights, and I pretty much skip over those, not because I don't think they're important or legitimate, but they simply don't have a whole lot of information to offer, and they're just not as fascinating as cases involving solid objects or landings or some kind of effects or extensive cases of that kind. But there is a lot more than I'm presenting here. And now we move to another location. This is the Philippines. This is not a single city. The Philippines is quite large. So this was a tall order. And I pulled out some of the more interesting cases that I could find from the Philippines. I did just recently cover a very interesting case from the Philippines involving a landing and humanoids, which I'm not including here because I don't want to repeat myself. But I did find a bunch. And this is by special request of Sire Gear. So I hope you find this interesting. There are absolutely some really fascinating cases of not just sightings, but landings and some humanoids as well. Now the Philippines is huge. There's more than 100 million people living there on 7,000 islands, so it should come as no surprise that it does have a rich history of UFO encounters. And if you want to look at the episode Not Alone, there is an interesting case involving landings and humanoids, but there are many others. At 3:15 p.m., March 8, 1968, the crew and passengers of a Japan Airlines Convair 880 jet were flying over the Bashi Channel in the Philippines at about 9,500 feet. Suddenly, the stewardess got on the microphone and told passengers, and I quote, "We can see a white object of unknown nationality through our right windows. We've often seen it on our regular flight." So more than 100 passengers actually watched this object, which they described as white, cylindrical, and slightly higher than the jet. It paced it for about 5 minutes, then darted off at high speed. And it was later that same year, around 8:30 p.m., July 11, 1968, that the area of Manila in the Philippines had a wave of sightings. Many people, including police, saw 3 round glowing yellow objects move over the city from southwest to north in this weird circular motion. 2 minutes later, 3 more UFOs flew over in that same weird pattern, and 2 minutes after that, there was a third group of 3 objects. They all seemed to just appear overhead, moving to the north, remaining visible for about 2 minutes before they suddenly, quote, winked out. Yes, a simple sighting, but it was very widely viewed and quite unusual. Now here's an amazing case involving humanoids. This involves 4 separate witnesses who each independently observed what appears to be the same UFO piloted by human-looking figures. The first witness was a farmer north of Baras who, at 4 a.m. on November 1st, 1968, heard this weird hissing noise and saw an object with a red light descending. He grabbed a flashlight and approached and saw a white vehicle with a transparent canopy on top. He said it was, quote, as big as a Volkswagen Beetle car with 2 occupants. He said it looked like it had small wheels. He could see 6 exhaust pipes at the rear, each about as big as a person's leg, but the occupants inside were easily visible. He said they looked like, quote, ordinary Caucasians. They were wearing white overalls with what looked like headphones. He approached and he watched this object kind of roll forward, then take off vertically, now in near silence. And it was 2 hours later that another farmer in the area said that he saw apparently the same strange white vehicle with 2 people in it. He was frightened by its unusual appearance and reported it to the town mayor. Shortly after that, at 8 a.m., another group of witnesses, a farmer and son, saw this white object hovering over them in silence. The fourth and final appearance of this thing occurred at 11 a.m. A farmer was riding his bicycle, came up a hill, and saw a, quote, strange car had landed nearby in this field. So he's riding by it, could see 2, quote, very tall Caucasian men. He said they were wearing white coveralls, just like the other witnesses said. One of these figures was sitting inside the craft while the other was walking around it. So the witness drove by, and looking back, he could see that one of these figures was watching him closely. He was frightened by this appearance. Suddenly he heard a loud roaring sound and watched this object move up a hill. Then it started to rise vertically, at which point it became totally silent. So was this a reverse-engineered human-piloted craft? It would appear so, hard to say, but there are other cases that are even more interesting. An astonishing and very widely viewed encounter took place on May 20, 1979, over the Philippines' highest mountain. It's called Mount Apo. Its elevation is 10,311 feet. An American scientist by the name of Ron Krupa, who worked for the Film and Research for the Endangered Environment, he was there to study the rare monkey-eating eagle. Now, this scientist, Ron Krupa, spoke with reporters, and he said that at 8 a.m. he and 2 of his assistants and more than 600 residents of the upper Barakatan village saw an object that was, quote, perfectly round like a big balloon. And as Ron says in his own words, as I looked into the sky to find out why the eagles were making an eerie sound, I noticed an unusually bright star-like object in the north, but almost directly overhead. He said a bright strobe-like light came from the object. He watched it with binoculars, and he says he could actually see movement inside. The object then landed behind a cluster of trees, causing many of the villagers to flee in fear to their huts. The object remained there for about 20 minutes before taking off and leaving the area. An amazing sighting. And here's another one. It was at 4 a.m. one morning in July of 1991 when a witness in Bohol says he saw a disc-shaped object with colored lights fly slowly over his home. It circled twice around it, and then it landed on a nearby hill. So he approached this craft and saw that it didn't actually land. It was floating just above the ground. And as he's looking at it, after some time, an opening appeared in this craft. A ramp came down, and he saw 2 figures come out. He said that they were not human. They had egg-shaped heads and what looked like, quote, malnourished bodies. They walked around the object, picked some things off the ground. He couldn't tell. It was too dark. They then re-entered the craft, which rose vertically and took off at high speed. So a couple of hours later, at first light, he went to the site, and he saw a large circular area of burned grass, and he also saw that some of the purple flowers that grew in that area had been pulled from the ground and were now missing. I love a lot of those cases. I can only imagine what it would be like to be inside a jet and have a UFO come flying along, pacing the jet, and the stewardess shouts out, "Look to your left. Here's another UFO. We see these all the time." Makes you wonder. A lot of pilots are seeing UFOs and never report them. A lot of really good cases of also involving landings, apparently. That one case involving apparent landing traces and an ET coming out and picking flowers. Quite a few cases like that. I think a few of those might have been reverse-engineered craft piloted by humans. Very hard to say, but judging from the details, I think it's a distinct possibility. But certainly some really compelling cases. And now we move to St. Louis. This is by special request of J.P. Pryor, St. Louis, Missouri, of course. And I have to tell you, this was a difficult research project because the name St. Louis is fairly common. It was very hard to research. Frankly, I've covered a bunch of cases previously in St. Louis, so I'm going to refer you, JP, to a couple of other episodes, including one, Making Friends with UFOs. Another is Schoolyard UFO Encounters, Part 2. Some really interesting cases in St. Louis there. And a third episode I did called UFOs over drive-in theaters. There were a few cases of UFOs over drive-in theaters in St. Louis, Missouri. But yeah, I did find a couple which I'd like to share. Just a couple. I'm sorry about that. My research, it wasn't always easy to find cases because some of these city names are quite common, and it's a huge research project. It doesn't always work out as I would hope, but I certainly hope you find it fascinating. So the first humanoid case I found in St. Louis dates all the way back to 1938. It comes from researcher Bob Buck. It doesn't contain a whole lot of information, but what we do know is that a family with a long history of UFO encounters, the mother of this family says that she saw a flying saucer on the ground with numerous entities rushing around it. Some of these were apparently grays. One, she said, looked like a 6-foot-tall woman with brown hair and brown eyes, human-looking, but wore a tight-fitting one-piece uniform. And she was walking next to an apparent hybrid, a little girl, very fragile-looking, with large, black, rounded eyes, no whites, but a very high forehead, a pointed chin, and very thin, fine hair. And again, not a whole lot of information about that case. But here's another, which occurred on May 13, 1949. This comes from researcher Lee Prosser in his book UFOs in Missouri. A local woman who lived on the outskirts of St. Louis said that she was outside her home one evening when a gray alien just walked right up to her, approached her, touched her arm, and then ran away. Needless to say, this was quite frightening for her. She said this figure had strange eyes. It looked unlike any person she had ever seen. She was too scared to scream or even really look at it as it moved off. And in fact, it took her some moments to finally run away. Her memory of the encounter is a bit hazy, so it's possible there's more to this. But she is unsure how long this humanoid touched her or even what it felt like. So I didn't cover sightings in that segment there, just a couple of humanoid encounters, which I think are the most interesting. It would take me a year to cover all the cases that are taking place in, say, a state. I wrote UFOs over California and New York and Arizona and other states. And these were all huge research projects. So when I put out this challenge, I didn't quite realize what I was getting myself into. But I said it, I made a promise, so I am fulfilling that promise and trying to find really good cases in each of these locations. And the next location that was chosen for me is Ocala, Florida. This is by special request of Torgomax. And I'm actually really glad you pointed out this location because I found some fascinating cases that I was not aware of, ones that provide absolute proof, in my mind, of the reality of the UFO phenomena. Some cases that are really important that deserve to be widely known. So thank you, Torgomax. I hope you find this segment interesting because I know I did. A very early Ocala report comes from Mrs. J.E. Harp, who said that at 11 a.m. on March 30, 1947, she was driving between Orlando and Ocala, and she saw several silver discs appearing and disappearing. Of course, this was during a huge superwave. It's a brief report, but certainly confirmation. Now, on the early evening of August 8, 1952, Miss Leon Maxwell and her family were sitting on the porch of their home located at 205 Southeast Watula Avenue, of course in Ocala, when they all saw two UFOs flying overhead. As she says, the objects were orange in color. One was just above the other. They made no sound. She contacted the newspaper hoping to find out if other people saw it, because she is certain that whatever they saw, it wasn't a plane and it wasn't a reflection. 3 years later, another huge wave of sightings hit Ocala. This was October 31st, November 1st, 1955. Dozens of flying saucers were seen by numerous witnesses, including Levy County Deputy Sheriff A.H. Perkins, who said, "You couldn't tell what it was, just a bright light. It was awful bright, but there wasn't any sound. First I thought it was stars falling, but then it went down and up, leveled off, picked up speed, and slowed down. No star does that. A couple stopped where I had got out of my car to watch, and they said they saw the objects all the way from Perry." So yeah, this was a pretty major sighting. A couple of years later, 1957, Dr. C.L. Quixley said that he saw a number of strange, kind of opalescent spherical objects over his home. They made this weird shrill sound, circled around in a playful manner, and then moved off to the southeast. Now here's a case which was investigated by Blue Book and declared unidentified. It occurred 12 miles west of Ocala at 9:30 p.m. on September 15, 1968. It involves pilot Ray Cole, who was flying at 9,500 feet with his passenger Ray Rushing, and they both saw this green and white light moving up and down, turning and climbing upwards, and as they're watching it, a second identical light appeared, and it made a 90-degree turn, then descended. So Blue Book was not able to figure out what this was and declared it unidentified. And of course the sightings continued. One evening in late October 1974, Butch Buford said he was driving from Salt Springs to his home at Northeast 12th Court in Ocala when he saw this weird red object in the sky. As he says, it was able to go at a terrific speed, then turn sharply in the other direction. Planes cannot do this. As it turns out, Butch Buford had been studying UFOs for about 3 years, and he had a friend who had built a UFO detector, which works on the process of detecting magnetic fields, because these craft apparently do give off magnetic fields. So Butch rushes home, and the two of them took this detector out into the backyard, and after 10 minutes, it started going off. And sure enough, shortly later, an object streaked overhead. So Butch Buford called the police, who said that they had in fact received 3 reports from other people reporting unusual activity in the sky in that area. Now, the biggest UFO event in Ocala history occurred on May 14, 1978, when numerous people in the area started reporting UFOs. Now, at the time of the sightings, there was a dozen personnel at the Navy's Pine Castle Electronic Warfare Range. And they also saw these objects and tracked them on radar because they were actually receiving calls from witnesses. They said that one of these objects actually hovered and then turned abruptly and sped off at such a speed that radar couldn't follow it. One of the witnesses was radar man Timothy Collins, who said that this object was moving so fast that while they did see it on the radar screen, they couldn't lock in on it. As he says, it did not perform like any aircraft I've ever seen before on a radar scope. First it was heading south, then it was heading north. Planes just don't have a turning radius like that. The way it moved, it was very abnormal. I've never seen anything like it, and I don't want to see anything like it again. Lieutenant Commander John Sullivan spoke with reporters, and he told them, yeah, the computer wouldn't handle it. So these officers were alerted to the sightings when citizens began to call them to report UFOs. One woman first called asking if they were dropping flares, which they denied. Then another man called in and said that he and 7 others were on State Road 19 when an object about 50 feet in diameter, covered with lights, flew right over their vehicle. Officer Robert J. Clark was fielding these calls. He worked at the Navy's Pine Castle Electronic Warfare Range, and he says after receiving these calls, and I quote, "We got out the binoculars and went up to the tower. We located an object due north, approximately 1,500 feet above the trees. We watched it for 15 or 20 minutes, and it looked like it was pretty stationary. We locked in on it on radar, and then all of a sudden it was gone. I can't explain what it was. It didn't seem to us like an aircraft." And soon there were more objects appearing on the radar screen. Some of these were seen visually, some weren't, but there were at least 3 sightings that night detected by the base. And as Officer Robert Clark says, afterwards we sat around and talked about it. So as news of this sighting spread, more witnesses surfaced. One was John Nunley, a pilot, who after seeing a UFO, tried to call the police and Navy for answers and basically got the runaround. As he says, "I was pretty upset about it. I mean, I'd really seen something, and all I wanted to do was find out if there had been other reports." Now, another witness was Rocky Morgan, and it turns out he was the one who called the Pine Castle base. And as Rocky says, it was up in the air straight over us. He and 8 other residents, including Billy Tatum, were in Ocala's Silver Glen Springs area and watched this object for about an hour. And again, he said it was 50 feet in diameter, oblong in shape, had a bright pulsating light, was low enough at times to disappear behind the trees, and actually seemed to land in the forest. So he called about it, wouldn't leave his name. As he says, "I wanted to keep my mouth shut because I didn't want anyone to think I was stupid. Now that I called Pine Castle and those guys have seen it too, I don't feel so bad." He did first try calling the sheriff, but the sheriff's office weren't interested and they acted like he was, quote, "drunk or crazy." Another person at the base, a watchtower guard by the name of John Falkenhagen, he says he saw this object both visually and on radar. And as he says, "I have never seen a radar act so crazy, spinning around and around, up and down. That night, we were told not to talk to anyone about this by the commanding officer. So they tried to cover it up, but clearly couldn't." Another witness, who is anonymous, said that they encountered the craft. They said they saw this solid craft no more than 20 or 30 feet away. They actually drew it. They said it looked like 4 cylinders connected by tubes. Another witness was Jason Leonardo Rafael Perez Diepa, who also provided an illustration. And he was so impressed, he ended up years later devoting a whole Facebook page to this wave of sightings. And in fact, these sightings didn't stop on that night. They continued for some months. On May 15th, the crew of the tugboat Lisa C saw a domed disc with 8 to 10 square portholes below treetop level. In November of 1978, a man called the local newspaper to say he saw a, quote, "ball of fire." He said it was over his home around 1 a.m., was silvery white in color, hovering at low altitude, and then started zipping around. And like others, he just wanted to know if there were other witnesses.
Is it 10-9? Oh, well, that's the one you pulled on me. Now it's payback time. Oh, what's up? You ain't gonna believe this one. We think we may have come up with the answer for it, so just hang with us. We'll let you know. If you want to head up towards the railroad tracks around Citra. Have you had a lot of power outage out there that you know of? Tonight? Not that I know of. Well, we had some reports of power outage. Fort McCoy, Gooski Prairie, backside of Citra, Lakes and Meadows. This is signal 14. Possible, repeat, possible UFO sightings. Hey, cool. This is by 2 different people. I was just over there. Oh, wonderful. And? What the hell do I do with it? Shoot the sucker down. I don't know. Okay, you hear me talk 1044, you best get the damn Air Force out. England Air Force Base, scramble, ready, alert. I tell you what, something's got a feather, got his ass up a crack. A big crack.
And year after year, sightings continued in Ocala. On the evening of June 17, 1987, the local sheriff's office said that they received 4 calls from the Ocala area. One of the witnesses was a deputy, and according to spokesman Ken Engel, this deputy, quote, saw it hovering over the tops of the trees like it was following the railroad tracks. We now know that this officer was Jay Manifold, and he said that this object was about the size of a car and totally silent. Another witness was Wanda Lasher and her family, who saw this object move real slow right over their car while driving along Pine Church Road. Along with Wanda were Stephanie James and her children. They all watched this object for about 10 minutes, but decided to leave when this object started to move too close for comfort. And as word spread, more witnesses came forward. Rob Dahl and Alan Strykoff said that they were camping at Lake Farles and saw an egg-shaped object over a 3-day period. Gillette Schramm said that she and her family saw this object right over their car. Joe Fitzpatrick said he saw this object zoom at him, make a right-angle turn less than a quarter mile from his home. A lot of witnesses. Another was Dale Kitts, who said a cigar-shaped object about 10 feet long, 6 feet wide, hovered right over his neighbor's cornfield. And this was during the day, 10:30 a.m., hours before most of these sightings. Another witness was Louis Stevens, who said that on June 23rd at 11 p.m., she heard this whooshing sound and looking outside, saw an object with portholes that actually landed in her front yard. She said it was, quote, whitish metallic. Said it was about 6 feet tall, disc-shaped, and it quickly darted away. It left a section of dead grass on her lawn. She actually called the police while it was there. They put her on hold and left her there. Apparently they weren't interested. She was too afraid to go outside and look at this thing. And she said after about 20 minutes, she heard the same whooshing sound, looked out, and the object was gone. Now there is a case involving humanoids that was reported to MUFON. This was one evening in April 2003 when a pregnant woman said that she woke up around 2 a.m. unable to move. And this happened over several evenings. At the time, she was having some bleeding problems with her pregnancy. And then one night, she said she woke up unable to move and saw a 3-foot-tall figure who, to her shock, looked kind of like an old man. She didn't think alien at first. All she knew was, as she says, he did not look like anything I had seen before. And she fell back asleep, but in the morning she discovered something quite unusual. As she says, after the experience I stopped bleeding, and I am now super interested in physics and science. I feel as if I were woken up. So she was apparently healed, and like many contactees, develops an interest in all kinds of really deep subjects. She says that her son, who she was pregnant with at the time, is now having experiences, and so is her daughter. And she herself began having more experiences. She feels they're positive. As she says, I get the feeling that whatever I have dealt with is positive in nature, although it scares me to death to think of seeing one again. Super interesting. Just a couple of more in Ocala. On January 15, 2005 at 7:30 p.m., a witness was driving south on Highway 301 and saw 2 unidentified objects right over Ocala. As he says, I watched the objects hovering as I drove. As I turned south on I-75, the red lighted object flying left to right in front of me flew directly over the highway with a very small white object blinking to the right. 3 to 6 multiple white blinking objects began blinking right over I-75. Then suddenly, he says, these objects rocketed down and towards him, forcing him to actually slam on the brakes. So he was quite stunned by this, and looking up, he counted about 6 of these objects flying in different directions. As he says, I'm convinced they weren't airplanes, blimps, or helicopters. he ended up reporting his sighting to Newfork. They do have several. That's one of the most interesting. MUFON has some as well. One of the more interesting ones occurred at around 3:03 a.m. on May 1st, 2021, when a witness said that she saw a giant fireball-like object come across Lake George, stop, and then revealed itself to be a solid object. She said it was huge, like 5 stories tall. She saw what looked like weird spires on top. She says it remained there for about 15 minutes, absolutely stunning her. Then it lit up and moved off, and this is when she realized she should wake up her boyfriend, which she did, and he got up in time to see it as it moved off. So there you go, Torgo Max, a history of encounters in Ocala, Florida. There's quite a few. A lot of sightings, but some landings as well, some humanoids, some interesting evidence, landing traces, and so forth. This subject is just endlessly fascinating. There's so many cases. And now let's move to the next location. Now first I want to apologize to one of you, Ashes to Ashes, because you put out a request for sightings and encounters in Warren, Pennsylvania. And it turns out there are so many locations named Warren. I just kind of threw up my hands in defeat trying to find cases in that specific area. I did find some, but they were pretty much anomalous lights. I just didn't find them interesting enough to include here. I'm not going to totally give up, so if you're patient, I'll try again. But I had to move on to the next location, which is Wilmington, North Carolina. And I did find a lot of cases here. This was requested by B. Need, and it was difficult, but I found some really interesting cases, which I hope you find interesting as well. So Wilmington is the last location I'll be covering today. I found quite some interesting cases, and it turns out Wilmington was also a participant in the famous airship wave. On April 6, 1897, according to the Sunday Star News, quote, "Hundreds of people were out on the streets and wharves last night looking at a brilliant floating mass in the heavens to the west of the city. It was moving rapidly, and many persons saw network about the aerial wonder. Some of our very best and most reliable citizens saw so much of the heavenly stranger that they had not the slightest doubt that it was the airship which had been reported from other cities. The ship moved to the west at a rapid rate. It seemed to have something of a searchlight facing eastward and created a sensation among all classes of people. The ship appeared to come from the ocean and passed opposite the Market Street dock, going in the direction of the Nevasa Guano Works. Some gentlemen who saw the ship through field glasses informed us that they could see wires and ropes and rigging about it." Again, a very weird series of events, that airship wave. But there were other sightings in Wilmington. Another really interesting sighting occurred on July 20, 1977. And get this, the witness is Miss James Kirk. No relation to Star Trek, she insists, but she lived at 513 Greenwood Road in Wilmington, and she told the Wilmington Star that she and her neighbor saw weird, quote, blinking lights. She was very smart. She ran inside and got her teenage children outside to see it. And as she says, "We went back out in the yard and this thing was coming towards us. You could see it was totally round and as large as an airplane. It got within 150 yards of us over the top of the pine trees. But there was no sound whatsoever. It had no definite pattern. It would fly forward, then it would go sideways, but it never got out of sight. After 30 minutes, it flew behind a giant pine tree and disappeared." 3 years later, on the evening of March 10, 1980, John Johnson was driving through Wilmington when a loud object came right over his car and shone down a brilliant light. As he says, "It sure scared me. It was something that sounded like an airplane. I had my little dog in the car with me and he started howling like it was hurting his ears. I thought the thing was going to crash on me and I got out of the car. It just lit up everything around me. The light was so bright I couldn't see what it looked like." So this object, whatever it was overhead for about 10 seconds before suddenly taking off very quickly and moving out of view. He doesn't think it was a helicopter because it sounded quite different. Couldn't have been a plane, but it upset him enough that he called the police and later spoke with reporters. 6 years later, 7:45 p.m., January 6, 1986. A couple had just finished having dinner in Wilmington and were driving to Hampstead along Highway 17 when a strange group of lights appeared about 400 feet overhead. They said it was boomerang-shaped, huge, about as big as 2 football fields. So the husband stopped the car and got out to watch, and his wife said, "It just came over, real slow. I believe it was the most terrifying feeling I've ever had in my life. I caught myself trying to hide from the lights behind him. I begged him to get back in the car, but it was like he was mesmerized. It scared me so bad I cried. It left me with an uneasy feeling, a very humble feeling. I did not want to see anything like that again, but 3 or 4 days later, I would have given anything to see it again." I find that interesting. First she's scared, and then she wants it to come back. All right, New Fork. They have a lot of reports in Wilmington, over 100. One did involve humanoids. It occurred one evening in August 2001. The witness was sleeping in an upstairs bedroom when a bright beam of light entered right through his window. He looked at the clock, saw that it was 2:37 a.m., and as he says, "Soon after, 3 silhouettes were standing in my room around my bed. I was unable to move at all due to an outside force acting on me. For approximately 10 minutes, the silhouettes continued to stay pretty still with only slight movement, though they seemed to be communicating somehow. As fast as they appeared, they disappeared, and I sat up in bed." The encounter was very frightening for the witness, and 2 years later he reported it to the National UFO Reporting Center because, as he says, "This event has haunted me ever since." So there you go, cases reaching back more than 100 years in Wilmington, North Carolina. A humanoid case as well. Some really compelling cases. So thank you, B-Need, for picking that location. I found it fascinating to find all of these cases. I really want to thank all of you because it's just super fascinating to me to find all these cases in all these different locations all over the world. I'm fascinated by both the similarities and the differences in each account. And I've said it many times, but each and every case has something to teach us about UFOs, about the ETs, why they're here, what's going on, and all the questions surrounding this subject. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And while I do have still 40 plus locations that I want to cover, I'm inviting any of you who haven't already given me a location to give me one. Name your hometown. Give me a specific location, and I'll put it on my list, and I'll do a future episode on the history of UFOs in that encounter. And again, I'm going to focus mostly on those cases which have something to offer in terms of what's going on, something more than just an anomalous light, something that can provide information, some insight into the nature of the UFO phenomena, why they're here, the more interesting cases, and specifically those of humanoids and onboard experiences and landings, that kind of case, because those are the ones that do have the most information, and those are the ones that I think really will lead to answering what's going on here. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different episode. There will be more forthcoming. So thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it. It's because of you guys I do all of this hard work, and it takes a lot of time. Trust me, it takes quite a bit of research. But I'm having fun. I hope you are too. So until next time, keep asking those hard questions, keep searching for the truth, and most important of all, keep having fun. And I will see you next week. Bye for now.
$26,323. hotel motel rates by the hour. Smart ass. I got a call right up your alley. What's the matter? You didn't know where North Magnolia was? Well, you said that it's through clear up there. You didn't say anything about coming in here. Now, you what now? I said he didn't say anything to me on the radio about coming in here. Well, North Magnolia comes out into 301 up there. Yeah, this is the road that runs along the east side of high school. Yeah. No, when you said that, why in the hell is he doing in town? I knew it kind of threw you for a loop. Is it 10-9? Oh, well, that's the one you pulled on me. Now it's payback time. Oh, what's up? You ain't gonna believe this one. We think we may have come up with the answer for it, so just hang with us. We'll let you know. If you want to head up towards the railroad tracks around Citra. Have you had a lot of power outage out there that you know of? Tonight? Not that I know of. Well, we had some reports of power outage. Fort McCoy, Gooski Prairie, backside of Citra, Lakes and Meadows. This is signal 14. Possible, repeat, possible UFO sightings. Hey, cool. This is by two different people. I was just over there. Oh, wonderful. And? What the hell do I do with it? Shoot sucker down. I don't know. Okay, you hear me call 1044. You best get the damn Air Force out. England Air Force Base, scramble ready alert. I tell you what, something's got a devil, he's got his ass up a crack. A big crack. Okay, well, what is it? Hang on. 313, go ahead. Temple, this is 16. I believe it's supposed to be on 316 east of the railroad track. I'll be on 301. I'll be technically on that way. I'll give you more 1043 when I go to 1097. Okay, or 1 through 1097, we're at 1041 and 43 with no fire road department. Let me bring him back up again now. What does that down tree have anything to do with it? They might have shot it down and they kind of pissed the tree. This is going to tell your grandkids later on. What does this UFO look like, huh? Okay, they were sighted by two different people. This is on one call that's in the screen. We've had a couple other people call reference the same thing. Last seen heading north from Citra, directly over the road. You turd bird, shut up a minute. Well, yeah, every time I pick up the phone, you guys got to start talking. 345, go ahead. On the 4,000 block of Northwest 63rd Street, current floor 792, Charlie Julia Romeo, 792 CJR. 10, 26, 23. That sounds familiar. Anyway, north from Citra, last seen heading north from Citra over the railroad tracks, going at a slow rate of speed. It's green and red in color, emitting sparks. 338. 323, 1026, 338. Okay, it's a mid... That sounds like to me? What? Sounds like a helicopter's got his ass in trouble. Negatory. No? No. Green and red, and it's emitting sparks. It also has two small headlamps on it. One points ahead, the other one points directly down. Oh, I've seen that one. I was over in Gooski Prairie, I seen it. Really? Yeah. Doing what on where? Just headed north. Seriously? I'm dead serious. I seen the thing had two rings on it. I just thought it was a helicopter or something. Okay, where did it appear to be to you? Well, it was, when I seen it was just south of Gooski Prairie, headed north. I was out there at 258. Alright, was it close to the railroad tracks now? 355. 1026. Was it over road, power lines, trees, railroad, what? Well, there wasn't any railroad there, so it was just coming over the prairie. You just confirmed our suspicion. What is it? Excuse me, it's a little instrument that Florida Power Company uses to trace power failures on their line. It runs remote control on the power lines, and I'm not sure the whole thing, but they can track that sucker and find out where a break in the line is. It does have red light on one side, green light on the other, like a boat does. It has a headlight that points ahead, one that points down to the ground, and it emits sparks because it's a frictionized motor. This is what we've come up with as probably the answer. But you need a 1050. No, we don't need anybody. Negative. Let me go to code 3 up there. This code is the real UFO. The 99 is 34220. 34,220. 1039 to 220. Okay. He may ease on up there, he's not sure. Well, I'm going to try to get up to 318 and catch it. We made 1039 to Alachua County and see if they can cut it off the pass. Whoa, don't go away yet. 599 1050. 259, go ahead. Northwest 38th Avenue, State Road 500. Be on a brown Ford panel truck. Florida tag C4LE Teton 98 and Nora. 26. Marion 357, go back to 88. Back 35722. 26. Marion 357. At high school. 10-4, we have additional 1043. Reference your signal 14. The supervisor is 1025 with Florida Power at this time. They advise 1054 on having any equipment in the area. 1026. 313, Marion. 313. 10-4. Reference possibly 357's call. I'm out with the power company now on 316. Reference that signal 16. So far? So far. 10-4, they're advising that there is no tree in the road, but it is on one of their power lines. If that could be a possible help to 357. Back to you? Yeah. U-1012 Florida Power? 10-4. 10-4, see if they can advise if they have any light emitting equipment on power lines, railroad tracks running north through Citra. 10-4, 10-4, 10. 357, good. 10-4, you may Miles 1 make 1025 was SX, so it's Charlie Sierra X-ray transportation. They handle that railroad for the company. 26. 355, man. 355. 10-6 operations, E29 to 1099 references. If you could go to South Channel, North, computer's locked up, 10-6. 10-6. First name is Lori, L-O-R-E-E. Middle name 345 to 23 just for one. 313, Larry. 313, go ahead. Careful, power company advises they don't have anything running up and down railroad tracks between Citra and 316. So far? So far. Back here earlier today, I saw the railroad people working on the tracks about 4 or 5 this afternoon, and they may have something at this time. 1026. 220, Murray. 220? Oh, we got phone calls on our Friday. 1054. We just thought it was a power company. We checked with them to get a verification. Oh, we have all complaints on the lights. 1054. 220. Area 357. 357, go, sorry. Supposed to be in the air from what I'm saying. I've got the power, French, I got the power company down here about a mile, maybe a mile and a half. And they're working on it, and they're the only ones that are up here in this area. 10-4. I'm right now up at 318, the railroad tracks. If you give me a limit letter, I'll advise it. Not really something to do over here. 345. 10-4, I'll do it. Oh, I didn't know somebody did 56 or somewhere there. 48. KB 6521. No PD, VTSO unit 3. Fit Ford 29. 26, not it. 26. 313, Mary. 313, good. 10-4, power company advises that it's not in the road, it's on their line. We won't need the road department, and some lights are out on this side of the tracks. And I'll be 1098. 1098, 313. Teletype 106, 65 to 99. Go ahead. 34232, 34,232. Yeah. 23. Marion 220, you're 1020.
Church Road, no railroad track. Correction, tracks.
357.
10 forward, 1035.
Station 1035, go ahead.
10-4, man. I don't know if there's going to be the same vehicle, but there is one with similar description. There's northeast, extreme red speed at the county line. It just took off there.
You advise a reference on vehicle?
The one you advised over the PX.
That's 10-4. So 98 to 35 at 00, 12 hours. Turn back 357.
Go ahead, man.
10-4, you advise vehicle northbound 301 heading towards Hawthorne into Alachua County.
1054, it's more of a northeasterly direction, like it's almost headed towards Gainesville. Back to Marion, northwest.
Kenworth stations to 35 to 23. Back to you. Can you advise if object is same description as given over the PX, and is it airborne?
10-4, man. It was. I can't see it now, but it was definitely same description.
1026 to 98 and 35 at 0013.
220, man. What's this 220?
357 to 20 for 220.
Right at the county line, 301.
220.
1026, have go to 3.
357, go to 3 for 220.
On 3. Go ahead. And you guys go ahead.
040.
What's that now? You're talking about
60.
26, appreciate that. 10-4, reference that description. Thing just took off, headed northwest towards Gainesville, right over the county line. It's gone now. It left at a high rate of speed. I just barely got a glimpse of it, but it definitely matched that description. Look like a vehicle or something in here? 10-4. That's where you at? I'm from 51. 10-4, right at the county line, maybe just a little bit north of it. You have notified Alachua County, maybe they can blow up those vehicles. I believe they're doing that now. And, well, how many lights on it? One on the one side of it, one the other. One's red, one's green. Then I had one white light in front and one pointing straight down. 26.